What's up? Welcome to a new episode of Movie Schmovie. This is episode number 265, and I'm one of the co-hosts of the show. My name is Steve, and I'm here with...
Ronald.
And John.
Yay! I'm looking at your beautiful faces, and I'm just so excited to see like the thought going into when you should say your name.
We're all smiling. I can see we've all kept our teeth during quarantine.
Oh, yeah.
That's good.
It feels kind of like hopscotch, man. It feels like we're like trying to... It's like, it's my turn to get in there. Yeah.
Wait, what view do you have it set on? I have it on gallery view where we're all just equally sized.
Oh, that's a good idea. I'm going to do that. I kind of like when it's like...
What is it? Gallery?
Gallery at the top.
Oh, yeah, that's what I'm in. Yeah, that's what I have, too.
I normally have it in speaker view because I like the idea that it feels like a show, and it goes to the person.
But it becomes like flashy editing when people start to...
It does. Kind of like a music video. Like, it's very... Yeah.
Plus, you can't like subtly burp or anything like that. You know, the mic picks it up.
Yeah.
So, how are you guys?
Pretty good.
Pretty good, man.
You look good. You both look really good.
Yes. You both look healthy.
I've been bald, and then I grew all of my hair back, and I shaved again, and then grew all my hair back. That's how long we've been in the house. It's crazy, like completely bald to. Yeah, it's nuts.
I haven't done anything except okay, when I'm going to be out around people, I shave it off on my neck, but everything else and my cheeks. You know, I keep the Wolfman thing down and I keep the neckbeard thing up, and then the rest. You can see this biblical shit's happening with the hair. It's fun to play around with, but I'm getting sick of it on my neck. Do you remember that, Steve? When you had your long hair, that feeling?
Oh, yeah.
So if you see me out with a man bun or pigtails or something like that, it's because I got to get it off my neck every now and then.
No judgment.
Yeah.
No judgment.
You shouldn't anyway. I look very cute with pigtails.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have something really exciting to talk about on this episode. I don't know if we're going to get to it just yet.
Right.
But maybe we can tease it in. Like, this is going to be something special. You probably read it in this description of this episode if you're listening. But
if you can,
we're going to act like you didn't. Yeah. Well, yeah. Let's just assume you can't read,
because it'd be like hieroglyphics, just like sitting on your TV or whatever you're looking at it or listening to it on.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
But so later in the episode, basically we're going to be talking about the new HBO show Lovecraft Country. And in what might be, we've had some access to, advanced screenings for films and whatnot, but we were fortunate enough to get something going with HBO where basically, and we're trying to do this with a couple other television studios, movie studios, anybody producing anything right now. Movie Schmovie is trying to get it, okay? Yeah. We're trying to get out there, get the name out there, and talk to some of these platforms, these studios, and see if they want us to watch their stuff so we can talk about it on our podcast either before it comes out or in the case of Lovecraft Country, basically what HBO was kind enough to do was to give us access to the first 5 episodes of the series, which just started this past Sunday. If you're listening to this the day it comes out, the podcast comes out, it would have been the prior Sunday on HBO on the 16th.
Yeah.
And so they were super cool, very kind, gave us access to the first 5 episodes, and we've all had the opportunity to watch them. So we will be talking about that for probably the majority of the episode. I think we're all pretty excited to talk about this show.
Yeah, for a lot of reasons. This one's been on our radar for a long time.
Oh yeah, we've been talking in our threads about this one for a while, and there's so much about it that it's just right up all of our alleys. So yeah, we'll be talking about that a little bit on the podcast here shortly, but I kind of wanted to see anything come up between now and the last time we recorded it, any other things that we want to talk about news-wise or any other, I don't know. I know there's a couple things that came up, a couple things right before we recorded that I wanted to bring up, but I don't know if anything's on the tip of your tongues before I bring that up, so give you guys a chance to throw something out there if you like.
One thing I did think was really interesting was an announcement that Blumhouse was coming out with 4 horror films in October.
8 over the next 2 years, I think.
Wow.
4 next season as well, or next year as well.
That's nuts, man.
It's interesting.
I wonder if that has to do with the whole idea of, just having a place to put movies nowadays, and then finding the perfect opportunity through a streaming service to kind of put them safely in a place where they could be enjoyed in a space rather than just kind of putting them on in the theater and them going into nowhere land around this time, man.
Were these movies ever going to come out in theaters and then they got shunted off? Or was this a deal between Blumhouse and Netflix that might have released somehow in theaters, but now is just circumventing that entirely? Because what we've mentioned, I don't have the names of this. There's like they have an overall name for this project, or because I know the 4 movies have different titles, and then there's some name for the project, I think. But
isn't it like Welcome to the Blumhouse?
Yeah,
or something like that.
Yes.
And just to be clear, I think it's on Amazon, right? Not Netflix.
Oh shoot, Amazon Prime.
Amazon, yeah. So I don't know a whole lot about the first 4. I do feel like one of them was at Sundance. I forget which one it was. I know I heard someone on another podcast I listened to. I know one of them I think was at Sundance, and one of them was based off of one of the Audible original audiobooks that they publish. I think that one is the one called Evil Eye, which I've heard about that audiobook before, but I think that's one of the 4 that come out this year. But I don't really know too much about it, to be honest with you. Like I've seen some of the synopsis for the 4, but I can't imagine that they're, with the exception if the one was at Sundance, like I feel like it might have been The Lie, maybe. So the 4 titles are called The Lie, Black Box, Nocturne, and Evil Eye. Evil Eye is the one based on the Audible original, and I think The Lie may have been the one that was at Sundance. But, I mean, it's so hard to tell now with some of these, really a lot of these things coming out on the different platforms, whether it's Hulu or Amazon or even Netflix. Like, besides the big titles that had theatrical dates that we knew got pulled and then sold off or anything like that, it's hard to say what the intentions were for some of these, because some of these could have been developed directly for Amazon or for Netflix or wherever they are ending up. But I don't know enough about these 4 specific ones to be able to say, if there was intention for anything outside of this, like this thing. This is a great idea. This is a great package. Like Blumhouse does something similar with Hulu, where they release like the horror movies theme to like the holidays throughout the year. They have I think it's 10 to 12 releases in the last year or two they've done. For like Thanksgiving, for Valentine's Day, for Mother's Day, horror themed shows that seem to be around different holidays through the year. But it's an obvious win to do something like this on Amazon Prime for them, because you mentioned Netflix. Like Netflix kind of already does something like this, with a lot of their original content, where they usually do something similar with like every Friday they have some big Halloween horror movie that comes out. And I say big in air quotes for just context,
like they can make a big deal out of it, sort of.
Right, exactly. Like it's a marketing big, It's like, the Netflix is for horror tales or whatever. But yeah, I don't know. It's really cool, Like Blumhouse has obviously got a lot in motion and a lot of production stuff going that was obviously done before COVID, or at least in post production. And this is a good outlet for them, and it's good timing. And again, it's just a good competition for Netflix, which has a lot of original stuff that I'm sure is coming out in October. And I mean, they have some big TV stuff that's possibly coming out in October. Like, The Haunting of Bly Manor hasn't been confirmed. There's been no trailer, but that's kind of one I keep reading about.
I was wondering if that was coming out before the end of the year.
I think it is. I think I mentioned on one of the other podcasts that I was listening to an interview with Mike Flanagan, and he definitely confirmed that it was coming out in 2020. And you got to think, if it's anywhere near being done, I mean, come on.
This is the time.
You got to get that out, around the horror, around the holiday, the horror, the horror fans, the fans of Hill House,
especially with no Stranger Things this year, they kind of need that something that fits into that spot.
Yep. So if that happens, it's a cool thing that Amazon's got 4 Blumhouse titles for, the people that like Blumhouse, that go see a lot of the stuff they put out theatrically, or watch what they put out on the streaming platforms. But it is a cool idea. And I mean, as horror fans, in general, this podcast is, and it's cool that, on some of the top streaming platforms, that there's going to be no lack of, original horror movies timed to come out right around Halloween. So that'll be, I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, me too. especially with the quality of recent direct to VOD horror movies like Host and The Rental, where I would rank them pretty highly amongst my recent horror picks. So
for sure, yeah.
I wanted to mention, you mentioned this to us, Ronald, and I don't know if you got around to seeing it, Steve, but Happy Joy, the Ren and Stimpy documentary. Did you watch it?
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that just a minute. I mean, I know we're going to spend a lot of time on Lovecraft Country, and I don't know that we would give a full big segment to this movie, but this documentary, which is equal parts just I don't know, a good oral history of the making of Ren and Stimpy. You get to see a lot of faces that you may have associated with names over the years. If you watch Ren and Stimpy, you've seen a lot of these names. And it was cool to see the faces, and it was cool to hear the story. But there's a shadow hanging over that, which is that John Kay, the creator of Ren and Stimpy, or one of the guy who first drew Ren and Stimpy, and is seen by many as the creative genius behind how they innovated, and that show really took the animation world by storm. But it marries a story of that with a story of what a manipulative, terrible person John Kay is.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to be coy about it. I mean, the guy's a sexual predator, and serial sexual predator, it seems. So I'm very creeped out by that. And I do think the movie addresses fairly effectively the question of how do you embrace something that you love that almost has nothing to do with the person that made it, but in some ways is so born of that person's energy and that person's personality that it's hard not to feel aspects of them in that work. I guess I should throw it to one of you guys since you've both seen it. I mean, do you think this movie did a good job of sort of incorporating those ugly truths, or did it feel to you like a movie that was trucking along, that was going to be a pretty standard pop cultural doc, and then like almost had to deal with this other thing?
It feels very fragmented in that way, but I think we're getting to the point now where you can't ignore how predatory men in power are sometimes, and to exclude that from their story is very dismissive of the truth and the whole truth. But man, it is jarring when it goes from just it's very clear that John had some like behavioral issues throughout, just the way that geniuses do. There's some inappropriate things people say, forcing people to stay up all night to work, things like that. Pretty standard abuse of power things. And then when it starts to get into the sexual abuse, the tone changes. It's kind of like the way that the Tarantino doc changed when it started to talk about everything surrounding why can't I remember his name right now, man? This what's his face? Tarantino guy.
Weinstein.
Yeah, Weinstein. The tonal change in that documentary about Quentin Tarantino, I think it was called 8, or the tonal change between those two, between the original story and the predatory stuff, is so jarring. And it feels like this in there, man. But yeah, I guess if they were to have a best case scenario, this would be it in terms of the way that it transitions into the information. So.
Because it has access to all the key people maybe that you would want to hear speak about it. Like, I was impressed that they had John Kay himself responding to it, and that it wasn't just something they edited in after they got a talk with him.
I feel like in no means is this like a hagiography of about him or about Ren and Stimpy or, whatever it is, because I feel like pretty early on, like there's a lot of commentary and just like a lot of the talking heads is not just praising him. I mean, like there's a lot of like little things peppered in there about the questionable things about him in the office space, in personal relationships, and just kind of how he carried himself and in the studio world. And it just seemed like it kind of was working up to me. It seemed like there was a shift in this film and in this documentary, but I felt like it wasn't as sudden as some other things I've seen. Simply because like from the jump, I kind of felt like I had a feeling. I mean, even knowing what I know about John Kay, like, and what I've read, like the big BuzzFeed thing that they broke, a few years ago, that kind of brought it all to light, things that had been kind of like known behind the scenes about him and the underage girls that he had dated for a long time, and just such disgusting stuff. But, even knowing that stuff, starting this movie, I didn't for once think it was like going about this, it wasn't like a praise train about Ren and Stimpy and him. Like, I think I did a pretty good job of like, like kind of like John was saying earlier on, like, it's kind of hard to separate it from the artist from the work, and, his obvious, genius in ways that kind of got this show to where it was, and it did what it did for animation in the time that it came out. And admittedly, like, it's a show I was obsessed with growing up. I love that show. And I still watch it from time to time. And I mean, it's just really hard to kind of reckon with that, to kind of separate the two. I always have trouble with that, but especially like in this doc, you see so much about just, how much of him is in the characters and how much of his relationships with people in his life are in the other characters. And like, it's just hard to watch some of that, as a grown man now, and looking back on a show that I love and still do really enjoy. And I don't know, but overall though, like I did feel like the doc did a pretty good job, kind of setting up the change that was coming in terms of the more disgusting stuff that we just talked about, but and that he's a part of. And but I don't know, it's such a hard conversation to have, because like you people admire the product because it's not only him that made this product, and you see so much of the love and passion and skill and talent and genius that was involved with Ren and Stimpy that was not him. And while he is a big part of it, and the real kind of catalyst to what it started out as, there's way more people that, have a part of this story that, it really is unfortunate to see his decisions and his actions kind of like have an impact on their part of the history of this property, and that's always the case when we talk about this stuff, with these, filmmakers or studio heads or producers, whatever, that kind of come to light of the inappropriate things they've done. But it's just a hard thing to watch and talk about, but especially like when you think about, and like a person my age or Ronald, like we're very close in age, and, you watch a show like this and you think about like where you were when you were watching, and like, things beyond what you're watching on the screen, like as a certain age, like is there's nothing beyond that when you're just watching this show, at least, when I was younger watching it, like it just entertained me. But then when you start to hear about it and you start to listen and learn about the making of it, and really kind of like the byproducts of people that like kind of maybe suffered during the making of that show, it's really, it just changes the way you feel about something. I mean, and again, it's not saying that I don't like Ren and Stimpy still, because I do still love that show. And, and the crazy thing is too, like watching this doc the other day, and then I'm reading an article about how Ren and Stimpy is being rebooted again. Like Comedy Central is rebooting Ren and Stimpy because the property is a viable property to them, and people would still watch it. They're doing this whole thing where they're bringing back Clone High, and they're bringing back Beavis and Butthead and Ren and Stimpy, and they have this whole comedy block that they're doing because it's still something that people like. It's still property, it's still IP that they could probably mine and make relevant again. But his part in it is just, it's hard to, yeah, I don't know. I have so much trouble like trying to get my head around like how I feel about the show when you like hear about things that like somebody that created it, it's like you just think that person is like the worst person,
because it's like they hoodwinked you, and especially with something that's for kids and so many people grew up on. It's like that you tricked me. I thought you were giving me a window into these ugly traits and characters, that's violent, and there's all this anxiety, and they stress that in the show, that like Ren and Stimpy are about sort of ugly emotions in a lot of ways. But if you understand that the person behind it is getting their ugly emotions out through this cartoon, you can have this catharsis with them. But if you find out that they were doing ugly things to people, it makes you feel like you were made complicit in something, without your without your consent and without your knowledge. And that may sound melodramatic, but it is very off-putting because I don't think I define myself by the pop culture that I buy into, but I do sort of have a stake in it. And when I pick the wrong horse, it does bum me out. And it's like you could easily have a movie that's just the difficult genius narrative, and you would already be thinking, do we forgive this guy because he's a genius, or do we still? Because I think that's one thing that the current kind of whatever you want to call this era is cancel culture, Me Too, whatever. It has caused me to consider that whole idea of the difficult genius. And it's like, well, why do you put up with people who are being abusive? Why do you put up with manipulative people? Not to put it on the victims there, but I'm just saying culturally, I feel like we're shrugging off this idea. I don't think John Kay would be able to run the show the way that he ran it in today's climate at all, you know?
No way.
And I think that's a good thing. So we have less of a potential for something like Ren and Stimpy to come out now, but there aren't going to be people getting hurt by this process, or at least not as likely. I mean, we know that all aspects of entertainment have a long way to go in that regard. But no, it's interesting, and you're right, Steve. It was part of the narrative about him for years. Like I remember interviews with him 10 years ago or more, where he would talk about his 16-year-old girlfriend, and I just was like. I remember a couple of like animation buff friends of mine and having an argument with them about, I was like, he's a creep. And they were like, no, but he's a genius. You know, that's just blah, blah, blah. And it's like, you know, it never seemed okay to me. So it's interesting that, you know, to see him kind of shiftily address those issues. I don't think he addressed them very adequately when he had a chance in the documentary. But I also don't know what I would expect him to say because there's not much you can say. You know, he still seems to want to explain how what he did wasn't so bad, you know, and so it doesn't seem like he's grown or whatever you want.
Yeah, it's a hard thing, man. It's a hard thing to watch.
But it's a good doc.
It is.
So, you know, here's a great segue, guys. You know, another artist who's beloved by many and very influential, but is extremely problematic? H.P. Lovecraft.
Oh, man.
Anyone who knows anything about Lovecraft has for years, decades known, however long, that he's a racist. And if you've read his letters to other writers, you know he's also sort of a prick. I find that this conversation getting going on the level that it's getting going right now is great because now people mention Lovecraft and they instantly talk about that aspect. Whereas for years I felt like, why are people would be getting on board with Lovecraft, people that I knew that were very progressive, and they'd say, oh, have you read this Lovecraft stuff? It's great. And then I would be like, they haven't gotten to that racist stuff yet, I guess, because as much as I mean, I've had volumes of the guy's stuff and I've read so much of it and I know all about it. And I love the people that he influenced and I love the people that influenced him, you know? And he was a very, I don't know, he was influential for a reason, but a lot of problems. A guy who you almost feel sorry for when you hear the details about how just fucked in the head he was. He was almost like an Anglophile. Like he really thought that he was like a proper gentleman and that anybody who wasn't like him was somehow a deviant or a weirdo. But it broke down very easily on racial stuff, and he was a xenophobe, and I don't know, terrible guy. So it's great to see a show that gets to play around with really not so much Lovecraftian styled horror, but just horror tropes and sci-fi tropes that addresses head on the fact that many of the people who wrote the stuff that we love were racist assholes, you know? And how do you guys think the show reckons with that as a reason for being? And then beyond that, like, let's get into this. HBO's Lovecraft Country.
Maybe we should open with the first episode, because that, to me, is the introduction to this world and everything surrounding it. And, I mean, for a first episode, it was pretty impressive, man. It was a lot of good world building. Tick and everything surrounding Tick, I'm super fascinated by the main character, and I think that's what I wanted to start off with. I thought that the first episode was some great storytelling for a pilot episode, and it introduced way more. To the point where I watched the episode and I was like, this was just an hour? I feel like I watched 3 stories in one thing, and maybe that's a testament to having source material that you can kind of pick and choose how you want to tell it. But
well, you know, I think it was like almost 70 minutes. So if that had 15 more minutes in it, it would have been like a brisk horror film, you know, and that is almost what it was. And it almost sets up the idea that each episode is going to be its own horror film like that, but it's not quite like that. It's a little bit more continuing as it goes on, but that initial episode burns through so much story and so much stuff, especially, well, I guess it's by the time we get to the end of the second episode that it's really been like, wow, that is a movie. I mean, that is its own little epic story. But the end of the first episode, you do get a set piece. You get like a full-on horror set piece. It kind of reminded me of Evil Dead, the set piece we get, and also just the way that the show gives you that. It reminds me of when watching Ash versus Evil Dead on Starz a couple of years ago, whenever that was on, that you could count on every episode to have at least one like cool horror scene that would either have some cool gore or some cool creatures or something. And I think this episode, it's like, it'd be like if Game of Thrones in the pilot episode there was a scene with a bunch of dragons going crazy. Like Lovecraft Country gets to that point in its visuals and its storytelling where it asks you to really buy a lot in one episode. And I think I thought it was really bold. And again, we talk about the HBO development process and production value, but you really feel it in this episode in particular of the show.
Yeah, man. Steve, what'd you think?
I mean, yeah, I agree. I think in general, I think it's just like another win for HBO. But yeah, the pilot, and just as a gateway to this series and to this world, there's so much going on, and I kind of was a little worried, if I'm being honest, that there was maybe too much going on. But I think the series kind of finds its footing as the episodes go along. But I think the big takeaway for me, like in the first episode, is just kind of meeting these the lead characters that you kind of are going to go on this story with, and really, really think there's some great performances in the series so far.
Absolutely.
It's a gorgeous series. Yann Diamage shot the pilot. If you've seen like 71 or White Boy Rick, I mean, he's a pretty skilled director. But I think the pilot looks gorgeous. There's some really interesting stuff happening in the pilot. Like some of the shots, like I was reading this article because I was watching it. I'm like thinking that some of the shots look so much like some of the Gordon Parks photography, and there's like literally like side by side comparisons in some of these articles that you can find that it's literally like it looks just like it, like it's just gorgeous. And I mean, it's amazing. Some of those kind of homages to that photography that take place throughout the pilot and other episodes in the season that we've seen so far. But I don't know, like I think it's a really interesting show, and I think if you're interested in, just how timely it feels like HBO has been able to be with shows like this and Watchmen and I May Destroy You, and just shows that seem that they're so of, like, while being in their unique worlds, especially Watchmen and Lovecraft Country, they're still so timely, and they're so like, how did they possibly, get these series through development? A show like this that's been in development for years. And I think this episode, speaking specifically about the pilot, I want to say it was shot in 2018. So like, when you think about that, and you think about just that HBO touch and the way they're able to do that in their production programming, and it's just really impressive that, like, they're able to get these shows out there that look gorgeous, that are really well produced, well written, have great casting, and are just really fucking interesting. Like, there's so much going on in the show, and it's scary beyond what's happening in the story, only because of how timely it is to what's happening, right outside our doors right now. And that's, I think, in some ways, that's an experience that recently HBO seems pretty. They seem to be delivering that pretty consistently, and that's just like a testament to how great they do their development with the series that they bring to order. And this is no exception. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't know that I'm at the point where I'm saying I'm loving the show to the point like I thought I would be through 5 episodes. But I would say, like, through the last episodes 4 and 5, I definitely was getting closer to that point where, like, I'm starting to see, I think, where the series is going, and starting to line some things up. And but it's, so far, like, it's something, it's really impressive, and it's kind of crazy, like, looking at all the people involved with it, like Mia Green, and again, I mentioned Yann Diamage did the pilot. J.J. Abrams is a producer. Jordan Peele's a producer.
Or Misha Green? Is it pronounced?
Misha Green. Is it Misha Green or Mia Green?
Misha Green.
Misha Green. Sorry. But yeah, like I saw some episodes of the series that she did Underground. I think you talked about that before, Ronald, didn't you?
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
I loved Underground.
Yeah, really, really impressive stuff. But just so much just great stuff working on this show. And I mean, the fact that you just mix in like the horror, the fantastical, the sci-fi, the again, the timeliness of what we're in now versus what these characters were in that Jim Crow era America back then,
Right?
Or at least in that world. It's crazy how much is going on, and yet you still find this like through line of such a like super interesting story of like what is going on and where are we going with these characters.
One thing that's really cool is there's two scary things happening at the same time. There's the supernatural and then just racism, right?
Yeah, just like yep.
Yeah, Misha Green, who did Underground. With Underground in this show, there's two things happening. There's a language that's uncompromising in this show that I experience as a black person in the world, right? That doesn't feel like it's discriminatory or any way. Like almost the way that Get Out felt. Like Get Out is a movie that is tackling a very specific thing that will affect people in very different ways, that doesn't feel like it's trying to keep anybody out of the world. There's only a couple shows in existence to me that exist like that for black people. I'll say like Atlanta, Issa Rae's show, Insecure. There are a couple shows that exist that are uncompromising in the way that the language is between people, and it doesn't invite anybody that doesn't want to be there.
Right.
And anybody that's there is there for a reason. You're willing to understand that, like, this is the world. This is the world according to the people that have experienced it. Because it's like, okay, so there's a sundown town. Like, they experienced that thing,
That's
right?
in the first episode, yeah.
I cannot express to you how crazy it is to go to Bel Air, Maryland as a black man in 2020. To just go to a town where after dark, you will always be pulled over. You will always be put in a compromised position that feels like your life is in danger. It's like when I used to do comedy there, it was like my fiance would be like, I'm going to stay on the phone with you until you leave Bel Air. I would always get pulled over. It was like, dang, it felt crazy. And it was always on a really dark street. And sure, things aren't the same like that they used to be, right? Like the chances of me being killed are high, but it's not like getting hung the way that it used to be. But it feels, quite frankly, the same as it did watching this footage, which is obviously supposed to be from a very long time ago.
I mean, I felt like throughout it was doing those things to sort of say, hey, like this hasn't changed, like this
Yes.
This is familiar, and not just the soundtrack. Being used sometimes to kind of blur time. There's a scene where a character walks across the street up into, I forget, a restaurant or a store or something, and there's just kids playing in the street, but it's like a contemporary hip hop song playing on the soundtrack, and it's like it takes you a second to go, okay, wait a minute, this is a comment on sort of things that never change. And I think the show has lots of things like that things never change. But this is a neighborhood scene that doesn't look that different from the way that it would look now to the way that it would have looked in the 50s when this is set. And we should mention, if anyone hasn't heard about the show, it's very narrowly, I would say, it's the story of a young man who's back from the Korean War in the 50s and his kind of journeys across Jim Crow America as he discovers his connection to like a mystical lineage and all these all this stuff that he loves to read about. He's a horror and sci-fi buff. All the stuff that he loves to read about, that he's always felt a certain amount of shame knowing that the people that created it, as I mentioned before, are racist. But that he's always kind of envied guys in these adventure stories, and then he's sort of placed in the middle of one of those stories. And he's the quote-unquote main character. That's Jonathan Majors, who we've enjoyed in The Last Black Man in San Francisco and To Five Bloods. But also, what's her name? Journey Smollett as Letitia Lewis, and she's awesome. Courtney B. Vance plays Uncle George. He's incredible. Michael K. Williams, who always brings this coiled rage and sadness to every role. He should be in the next Paddington film, just so we can see how his energy works in that happy world. No, he's in it, and he's doing his usual like stuff where you want to know more about his character. And learning more about him is honestly one of the cool places where the show is surprising me at every turn. But anyway, there's a lot of great characters, and there's several moments in this where the score almost had sort of a vintage Spielberg kind of feel, and seeing like the 2 or 3 characters or that we see assembled, and they're like in a hallway with a flashlight, and they've got little leather briefcases and stuff. I mean, it reminded me so much of that kind of storytelling that I thought there is a certain thrill, and I know that one day this should not be a thrill, and we should not even notice it, but there's a certain thrill in seeing this kind of story with black folks in it. And no apologies made for the fact that pretty much any white person you're going to encounter is a piece of shit, or at least has some kind of angle that they're playing.
Yeah.
I mean, it reminds me of Get Out in the fact that it's like a world that white people can recognize that level of casual racism, even if they don't think of themselves as guilty of it. But that everything is a micro or a macro aggression. You know, I mean, there's some pretty major aggressions. This is set in the 50s. But I just kept getting this little charge from the fact that it was like, I love these characters, maybe more so than the show that they're in, like you said, Steve. I'm enjoying it a lot. I don't know that it's quite clicked for me as like they've quite mastered the tone and everything about it. But it's so fun to watch. And every time they kind of start to lose me with a scene, there's some moment that like emotionally or just from the adventure part or the spookiness or the visuals, there's some good gore. There's some good horror movie thinking. You know, it doesn't surprise me that Jordan Peele had a hand in helping to develop this show. It doesn't surprise me that J.J. Abrams lent his, whatever structure he could. But this seems like Misha Green's show in the milieu of horror and sci-fi, and the fact that it is, it's about Black America. I kept thinking of our conversation from a few months ago, Ronald, where you were talking about having a difficulty watching and enjoying period pieces at a certain point, because you said they feel like they're either sort of omitting the experiences of Black people, or they are lying about the experiences of Black people. And I was like, this is cool to see a period piece that I can enjoy the production values of the period piece and the costumes and the cars, and yet I can also see that it's dealing like up front with those issues, and it's trying to do this other thing, as you've said, 2 things at once. It's a horror adventure story.
Well, some of it feels like there's a through line, right? But some of it feels like each episode, if the through line wasn't included, could pass as like Twilight Zone episodes. Like they feel very, very isolated, and they have like a lesson in them and some conscious idea and some like symbolism in some of it. Like I was watching each episode, they felt so isolated from each other besides some of the through line that I was like, man, these could be in any order besides that main through line and be separate, just episodes of a story.
Right.
And I wonder if as it gets further away from the book, like you're saying, if they literally become these like just one episode that has nothing to do with anything, and maybe the next episode might be connected, and they just kind of do that. It felt so separate.
Right.
Each one felt so separate.
I remember reading the book knowing it was going to be a show. The book is by Matt Ruff, who is a pretty good writer, and it's not a bad book at all, but it didn't quite, like, just like the show doesn't really delve into the sort of horror that was in Lovecraft stories that much. The book almost felt like it was misnamed. Like it's much more about like a general survey of kind of sci-fi horror and the sort of stuff that people wrote stories about in the pulpy magazines. It's Lovecraft, but it's many other people. But I think the name definitely has a right to be there because of the way the show addresses race. And he is kind of the granddaddy of the genre in many ways. So it deserves to be, we deserve to be reminded of who he really was. But what really struck me about that aspect of it was that whereas in the book I was reading those separate stories and kind of wanting it to build up to be more, I knew while I was reading it, oh, this is going to be a show, and I can see how that'll work for a television show because you can draw out some of these stories a little bit longer. You can spend a little more time seeing what the characters are seeing. But also you have the option of second, third season, whatever they might do, of picking up some of these threads that the book might seem like it didn't adequately deal with. And now, after watching the show, my opinion of the book has raised a little bit, just because now that I guess I've grown to like these characters a little more, seeing them fleshed out. I now admire the invention of this world, because it is a good setup. This idea that Atticus, or Tick, the main character, his family was involved in the production of a guide for travelers, so that a black person would have this guidebook and it would tell them places they can go. I mean, it's very much like a Green Book kind of concept, but it's almost filtered through a slightly more urban legendy. It feels a little bit spookier what they're doing, but maybe that's just because of the backdrop. But I thought that was a really cool thing to include in this story, and maybe even to take that plot device back from Green Book.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that, like, Ronald was kind of mentioning it earlier, and you're kind of continuing it, but I mean, the idea that I don't know that I really feel it's strong enough that like the episodes would kind of exist on their own, because I feel like there's a lot of things that are tying them together. But you are right in the sense that like it kind of sort of, not so much Twilight Zone, and it's not the same kind of show, but it kind of reminded me of like more like the X-Files, where there was like a through line story that would come into the episode, maybe 20% of the episode. But like, you had these like bottle adventures that like these two were always on. And while some of them really didn't like talk directly to the real mystery that you were following with the leads, some of them did. And like, like you said, John, like these episodes, the first 5 that we were fortunate enough to see, it did feel like, episode 1 kind of has like the creature feature vibe, and 2 has a bit of like the mystical, fantastical stuff going on, and 3 is like a haunted house, and 4 is like a like the adventure, almost like an Indiana Jones type of adventure. And then the last one that we were able to see like kind of had that body horror stuff, which actually was some of the coolest stuff I thought in the series so far.
And that episode goes to a really dark place, no matter how you look at it.
Almost like Tarantino dark. Like it got like, I was like, what?
Right.
I had to walk away, to be honest with you. Like at that, I was like, I can't do this. And Aaron's like, it's funny.
But it's like, it's an interesting, like,
I think I know the exact part you're talking about.
Yeah, right. That's but I think that's an asset of the show, though. I think that we're all kind of hitting on that element of it, which is a good takeaway, is that like there has been something unique to each episode that has made it feel different, while still following Letty and Tick, and learning more about Montrose, and like all these little things that we're kind of just building up the story that we're supposed to be following. There are these other characters experiencing things that are kind of playing in all these genre pools that we just love to get in sometimes. So I think that has been like my big takeaway from the series. Is I think that's maybe like one of the strongest assets that it's running with right now, is that I don't know what series episodes 6 through 10 look like, but I'm very curious to see kind of how they continue to play with those elements of the genre. And it's like it's, and we're not going to really talk spoilers, really. I don't think we should personally all that much, but I think it's really cool. Like the opening scene of the series, there's a character involved that like really is a character that obviously is going to have a big part in the series that we don't really know much about at this point. But I love how like, at the end of season of episode 5, like that character, or at least the actress playing that character, she comes back into the story in a big way that, she's popped up here and there through other episodes. But I think that's kind of what I'm saying about like the X-Files thing, where like there were all these characters that would go away for a while, but then they would come back, and you knew the presence of that character had something to say about that bigger story that we're really intended to follow through the season.
There's one episode that starts with all the characters piling into a car to go on a trip and to a museum, and we know why some of the characters are going and the other characters are going for a different reason. And yet it has the feeling of like, if this was the show and every episode it was a few of these characters piling into that car to go to some place to investigate something, it would be that X-Files show you're talking about, Steve. It would be almost like that episode of The Week format that I think this show could sustain. But usually by the end of an episode, anything I start thinking about, like, oh, this is the new format, I'm like, oh, no, it's not going to be these. I thought it was going to be these three characters together all the time, but it can't be that now. Well, no, I thought it was going to be these three, but no, that doesn't seem like it's going that way. Everybody has their own story and their own purpose to the story, and that feels very interesting and dangerous, and like you don't know what a character... There's a couple characters who I don't think are going to utterly shock me with like what moral level they'll sink to. But other than those two characters, everybody else on the show has done something that I've been like, well, dang, I don't know that I understood who they were. I thought I did, you know. But it's interesting to see the way that the different sorts of horror will intermingle. There's no like overarching mythology to this world yet, except for just... shit is real, you know. Stuff happens. When someone says haunted house or someone says vampire or whatever, they might literally mean it.
Believe them.
Yeah.
Yeah, please
Run.
Yeah, I think Steve, you were on to something, man. There are parts of it that feel a bit fragmented, and you know, like I've connected with these characters, and some of it might be what it's doing, like the fact that you can like these individual characters. I even like the villains or the perceived villains in this movie. I mean, in the show. Oh, I don't know if you guys heard that.
We did hear that.
That was loud as hell. So yeah, I don't know if I necessarily like love. But no, I like all the characters, and I think that's the point of all of it. Like, I think that the relationships and the way they clash in this bigger story that's developing as the stories go on, in between these mini stories that are also building on it. But you're right, it's elements that are kind of coming together, parts that you can kind of figure out if you pay attention to everything. They kind of tell you in some ways, but there have been some big surprises, and I think. You're right. It's developing its footing, and around I think the end of the third is when I've started to really understand. Like, okay, this pace is something I could get used to. These characters, I'm starting to kind of love in a lot of ways, and you know, I don't know. It feels like I kind of told Steven that it felt like. Kind of True Blood at you know, parts of it,
because there's a kind of almost like a goofiness to it or something,
pulpiness to it.
The southern accents on True Blood were too jarringly fake to me after a while, but I don't know how silly it got, but my impression was that it had some pretty wacky storylines on it, and this show feels like it could go there. There's one music cue right at the top of the second episode that I hope is not a temp cue. There was some temp music and temp effects, but there's a little opening music sequence in the second episode that I hope is what they use on the show, because it was fucking brilliant, and it was another, like, lifted from another place. Do you know the moment I'm talking about?
Yeah.
That I just was like, oh my God, they can do anything. I mean, honestly, when I heard that song played in this world, I was like, okay, they can do anything now. Because the song fit the moment, but it also makes you think of another iconic show that is maybe a show that you could say in some strange way paved the way for this show. I don't know. There's so much like wit behind those decisions. And you were talking about the different feels of the different episodes. The third episode, the ghost story one, it like breaks up its structure with like title cards and like opening script that's different. I don't think any of the other episodes do that, and that actually felt like they were kind of saying like this is formatted like it's a different kind of thing, like it's like it's a little short movie set.
Totally.
That it's so no, I think if with that in mind they could do some amazing things going forward, especially because like I said, they've burned through about 40% of the plot of the book already in the first 5 episodes. I don't see how they don't just have a clean slate in season 2 unless they hold something back. So
yeah.
Well, we'll see.
Yeah.
We shall see.
This could be it. This could be that new HBO show that I feel like it is very in your face and very hardcore HBO when it comes to the violence and the sex. That stuff when it happens, it's very much in like that thought of maybe I could watch this with my 12-year-old son who likes horror. I'm like, no.
Yeah.
They make sure of that about once an episode, but for adults, this is a fun mix of a lot of different stuff. So it'll be interesting to see if it kind of picks a tone if it goes along, or if it just continues to show you that it can do anything.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. It's a fresh. I mean, especially as we're consuming as many shows as we're consuming during this quarantine and everything, it was a nice change of pace. And it does have its flaws, but man, it feels very fresh to me, and I needed it.
Yeah, definitely excited to see where it goes. Now we have to wait.
I know. Now we're just like all the other jackasses out there.
Yeah, man. But it's definitely something to look forward to for sure. So
Yeah. Thank you, HBO.
yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you, HBO. You bumped another HBO show. We were going to talk about Perry Mason this episode, but we got Lovecrafted.
Yeah, we did, man.
Did you finish it, Steve?
I did.
Okay, Ronald, real quick. This is just something because it's related to
Sure,
what we just said.
sure.
What do you think about Perry Mason as a show that, like this show, might even benefit if it was more like Case of the Week? Like, don't you? Because here's what I would say about Perry Mason. I felt like the acting was great, the production values, which I'm a fan of. You pointed out to me. What about the fifth time you hear someone say the production values are great? They're not saying something else is great.
Yeah.
But I mean, I loved everything about it, but I didn't think the story was that great, and it reminded me of like the second season of True Detective or something, where I didn't hate it, but I got to the end and I went like, I don't really know that story needed to be stretched out over 8 episodes. Like with the twists and turns it had in it, it didn't. I don't know. It wasn't. The reason to watch that show was not the twisting, turning plot for me. It was more about like just seeing Matthew Rhys yell at people.
Yeah.
But if it was a little bit less serialized, maybe I would enjoy seeing him take on a case that lasts like a couple episodes and get a season where you get like 2 or 3 of those. I would think that would feel kind of fresh. I don't know if by the time we got to the end of 8 hours, I was that invested in this particular case, but maybe that was just me.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, I try to think like I know when you mentioned that before, like I try to imagine that kind of show on HBO, and I don't know. I mean, I guess it could be there, but I don't know. I didn't really have that type of reaction to it. I was kind of invested in the story. I didn't really think it was like any kind of amazing story or twisty turny, any kind of special thing like that. It was more of a like just totally being engrossed by the period and the way, the production and the way, people are, changing with the way the world is changing. Then, in technology and police work and, religion and
well, that stuff was great. I liked
that stuff was really interesting to me. Like that stuff is like, that was some of the most interesting stuff of the show. But again, like you said, like the big thing for me was like, I think the cast is amazing. I love the cast of the show. Matthew Rhys is always great. I love Shea Wiggum. Like I just, Lithgow was always great.
Yeah,
I mean,
he was amazing, and he did exactly what his character should have done in terms of what he needed to do for the story.
Right,
he filled you with. You've got to introduce like a lot of these stories. If you have like a benefactor or a mentor at the beginning, you think to yourself, okay, they're either not going to make it to the end, or they're going to turn out to have secrets and be evil. You never start off a story with a great mentor, and then at the end of the story have him like, "I'm glad I taught you. Yes, you were a great mentor. You told me the truth, and you did well." Something's got to happen. You got to have something in the middle of the story. But no, I agree. And what's her name? Rylance? Is that Julia Rylance? Is that her name? Who played?
Is that Dell?
Della. Yeah. Della Street. She was great. Shea Wiggum, it's interesting.
I love Shea Wiggum so much.
Cool. He's so much like an old-timey actor, like
he kind of gives me that like Michael Sheen vibe, like, just like he's kind of so different than everybody else I'm watching on the screen. So like when he's on the screen, whether he's a good guy or a bad guy or questionable in every regard, like I'm just like glued to watching his like little ticks on his face and like him just not making eye contact with the main character as he's talking to him. Just like things like that I just love about his performances and a lot of the stuff that he does. And especially in the series, but I don't know. Maybe we can talk more about it once Ronald sees. I don't want to.
One other thing, one of the two kind of corrupt cops, not the really rough one, the one who's like the more hanging back, laconic one. Do you recognize him? He's the CIA spook on Narcos, who shows up. He's got like a beard and glasses and everything.
Yep.
Great character actor. He's one, and he was also on Lost, I believe. He was
Lost. I thought he was on Lost.
Actually, it's in Lost that he had glasses. It's on Narcos, he's got long hair and a beard. But anyway, whenever he shows up, he brings something to a role, and it looks like he's going to have, maybe more to do if this show continues. So I was glad to see him kind of become more than just a background guy.
It got a season 2 pickup.
Yep.
Yeah, so.
I do feel like it's now set up to be the show that I perhaps want it to be, because I just remember, the whole thing that they jokingly refer to it once in this show, that Perry Mason used to get people to confess on the stand. That's what he always did. And they make a point in one episode of this that never happens. No one ever confesses on the stand. But I would like to see a little bit of that sort of Perry Mason keeps getting, because I don't know. It's like I said, Matthew Rhys is a great yeller. He seems really emotional. He seems like he might cry when he's mad. I think there's something powerful about that kind of hero. He seems almost fragile and unstable for this type of guy. Do you watch anything, Ronald?
The Deathstroke animated movie, the DC movie, I really enjoyed. I don't know, man. DC, especially in the fandom coming this coming weekend, they have a ton of announcements that they're going to make. And I think this is a sweet spot that they have right now where Marvel isn't doing a lot of content and DC has a chance to kind of make a couple moves. The Snyder Cut, the new trailer's coming, the new Batman. There's going to be a teaser for that during the weekend. It just feels like this really cool energy surrounding all things DC right now. And I'm a huge fan of it. So the Deathstroke movie is definitely worth checking out. What else? Did I talk about Lower Decks on CBS Access?
Mm-hmm.
I watched the second episode of that. It's really good. I just think that it's consistently funny in these 2 episodes. I know that a lot of people don't like it because it's just not a live action good Star Trek show, but it's fun, man. It feels kind of like Rick and Morty. With a lot of Next Generation sort of references. But 90 Day Fiance, man. That's another thing I want to throw out there. If you have a heart in your chest, the 90 Day Fiance universe in Love After Lockup.
I've watched several 90 Day Fiancés, and I always had very mixed feelings about, depending on the sort of situation depicted. There were times where I was like, oh, that's sweet. And there are other times where it was like, oh, this is a creepy situation.
Oh, that's the magic. The creepiness is the magic of that show. Because there's like, that you're going to be on camera and people still are slithering snakes. And when you address it on the reunion, they're like, well, I just thought, it's like 90 Day Fiance, man. Love After Lockup and 90 Day Fiance. If you want to watch something that is both sleazy and inspiring and slightly emotional, those 2 shows.
Would that be sleaze-spiring? There's got to be a good word for that.
Sleaze-spiring is hilarious. But yes, so that's what I've been. I feel like maybe there's some other stuff. Rattle off some stuff you guys have seen.
There's only 3 episodes out so far, but I think it may be one of my favorite comedies that I've seen so far this year. It's a new series on Apple TV Plus called Ted Lasso with Jason Sudeikis. It's kind of based on, I don't know if there were some like sports promos that he did a couple years ago for NBC Sports as the character, but basically it's like that taken to series with Apple TV Plus about like an American collegiate football coach basically going over to coach one of the Premier League soccer clubs in England and basically just like the fish out of water story. But I like genuinely love the show. Like it's so optimistic and so like warm and positive, and like his character is so like sweet. that it's like it's like kind of infectious, and it kind of happens in the show to all the characters that he comes in contact with. It's just like a really positive show that, I don't know, maybe that's a good mix of some other shit I've been watching. But Apple TV Plus came out. It came out last week, but I think they did the thing where they did like 3 episodes.
Oh.
And then they're premiering the last like 7 over every Friday from there on out. So I'd recommend checking
Steve,
it out.
I saw that.
Seen it?
I did see that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Man, I cannot stress to you how much it pulled at my heartstrings, man. You're right. There's a sweetness to
Aaron was like in love with it, watching
man,
it. Like
there's some,
it's so sweet.
There's some scenes where like he is looking in the face of evil and he does something really funny and everybody's like, fuck, I love this dude. He's so likable, man. And it doesn't feel, I don't know, man. I think the older I get, the more I just want some like cool, funny stuff that's light. And I don't mind the heavy stuff. We can always dive into that.
That's what I'm saying. We talk about it.
We talk about it like crazy. We talked about a crazy show about that deals with race.
Right.
But man, this show is one of the better shows I've seen in a really long time. It's also the crispest show. One of the most beautifully shot shows that I've ever seen. And look, I get feels, man. I love London. Like you ask anybody, I go there. I try to go there yearly. And it's one of those places you kind of don't know until you watch a bunch of stuff with it. But it has there's a magic to it. There's a magic to it.
Yeah.
And seeing an American, a southern dude just plopped in the middle of it and reacting to it is so good, man. And he's open. It's not like you see people go places and they're just like, this is a bit, I'm used to America. He's just like, okay, well, this is different.
Like, how do you guys do it here? Let me learn. Like, you know, he's just like, yeah, it's not even like he's like always trying to like cut it with comedy. He's like some of it is just so genuinely, I don't know, just like optimistic. I don't know, like he just like the openness of the character. Again, like this is something I didn't really know much about. I saw the trailer for it, and I seen a couple of the promo skits that they did with NBC Sports for it, like before when they did it, but. A pleasant surprise. I just like randomly watched all 3 of them last night with Aaron, and we were just both like, we loved that show. Yeah. And I was like, oh, there's no more. And I was like, oh, they're doing the thing where they release a couple and they do it every Friday. So.
Jason Sudeikis is a great guy. I like him anyway. Like, so it's like
I love him.
His comic energy kind of deserves to be, find a good character for him to play like that. So
yeah,
it's kind of like it's not. I don't want to say it's the same thing. It's not at all. But like it's kind of like in that what's the one that Hank Azaria has? The baseball one? Brockmire. Like, different characters, different setups, but it's like that same kind of thing where there's just like a lot of really good comedic beats. There's some heart. There's like some silly characters. There's a little bit of sports. If you don't like sports, it doesn't matter at all. But I mean, it's just funny seeing not just a fish out of water, as a man in a different country, but like, a man coaching a different sport that's called the same thing here. It's like, or something, it's just like, it's funny that the idea of that's just fun, I think. And it's simple. And like Ronald said, like, it's nothing, it's just like, it's just easy to watch. And it just felt good watching it. And it was just like, yeah, that was good. I think they did a really good thing. And it's a really good show. I'm excited to see the rest of the season.
Man, something about that show got me randomly emotional that shouldn't have gotten me emotional.
I know.
So
it's weird.
I'll tell you, and it doesn't spoil anything. When the search, the eternal search that the boss had, and then we find out where the gift comes from. I don't know what it was. It's something about just how you just have an idea. You have ideas about the world, and then you meet somebody that's just like, nah, it's not that bad. It can be kind of nice. It can be kind of beautiful if you just kind of try to make it that way. And he's kind of forcing his way, which is kind of positive, and it's not perfect, and kind of putting it on, spreading it slowly, giving people these nice little doses of kindness, and it's affecting some people literally in ways that they hate. But
they're like, how do I handle kindness?
It's so cool, man.
That's what it is. It's just a simple fact, and it's simple, like you said, and like I've said. What works about that scene you're talking about, or that whole setup, is that it's just a reminder in all the crap that we talk about and all the shit that we face, you know, that there are still really genuinely like good, sweet, kind people in the world. And it's like, if you can come across one or two in your life, in your day to day, like it can make your day better. And these are characters that he's interacting with that just need that. And like, it's just simple. It's just like hey, let's find that. Let's do that. Let's be that for the people around us.
Yeah,
so it's
man.
like,
Especially
I
now.
like seeing that for sure.
Especially now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm watching Little Voices, Little Voice on there as well. The HBO, Jesus, the Apple TV Plus show. And
Is that the Sarah Bareilles?
yeah, man. It's
Yeah.
that's another one of those shows. It's heavy, but like, man, it's a fun watch. It's like a lot of cool singing, and I don't know. I like it. I think that Apple TV Plus is doing something that feels, I mean, like it's just quality over quantity. There's just a thing that they're going for, and if you like it, you like it. If you don't, yeah, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I like it. I like what they're going for.
Nice.
I started watching Channel Zero kind of on your recommendation, Steve, and that I would enjoy it. And it has been good. I mean, the mood, the pacing, the atmosphere of it is usually pretty engrossing. So and
Yeah.
I think I like the second season better than the first so far.
Me too.
Yeah, those two are pretty neck and neck for me. I think some of the visuals of the first season kind of play more into like some of the horror that I love to watch.
Yes, the creepy kids show and like the distressed video.
Yeah.
I think overall the acting and the tone and the pacing of the second season is a little more even.
Yeah, you're probably right.
I like Paul Schneider a lot, but he was kind of a weird protagonist. Like there's some times where he didn't do great at that thing of like having an ambiguous expression on your face as you like move through a room. He frequently looked like he was trying to look shocked. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, and he wasn't like bad. It's just, it wasn't, when the second season, it's more like,
That's my Paul
like
Schneider.
teen horror movie. It's funny though. You made the exact expression that I was thinking of, where he's just like, I'm amazed by that, but he would start there and not change from that, you know. But it wasn't like bad. I mean, he's always had kind of a low key comic. I've seen him in mostly comedies, so seeing him in this kind of thing was a nice change. But no, I'm digging it. So I'm glad I've got 2 more seasons of that to get into.
Nice.
I wanted to mention one more show. John Hodgman's Dicktown. John Hodgman solves crimes for teenagers. It's a cartoon. It's on Hulu. It is, man, it's so funny. It's so fucking funny. And it's short. I think the episodes are about 10 minutes long. But it's a part of this big thing called Cake, which is a bunch of, but if you look on Hulu, it is isolated as Dicktown. It's a really funny show, man. I love John Hodgman.
The premise that he was like a teen Encyclopedia Brown detective who, now that he's a grown-up, he still does like teen cases. I think that is a very funny concept.
It's so good, and it's not creepy, man. It sounds so like, especially now with things coming out about people, it sounds like it's super, but it comes across really, really funny, man. It's
I love him.
Check out. Yeah,
I gotta watch that. That sounds fun.
Dicktown. Yeah, man.
All right, cool. Well, I think we're good.
Yeah.
That's it.
We are good.
Yes. Oh,
We are good.
one more thing.
Oh my God.
One more thing.
God, Ronald.
Big shout out to one of our longtime fans, Tehran. I've known him since high school. He's been listening to our podcast since the very beginning, man. And he texted me as we were recording this, and he's like, "Hey, you know where I can find a host?" And I'm like, I know where you can watch it. He's like, I was listening to the podcast, and it got me excited, and I want to see it. So, man,
That's awesome.
the fact that, you know, he listens, and he's always giving me feedback, and I guess I need to be more transparent about that, guys. He loves the podcast, which is really cool, and it keeps him busy. Thanks, man. Thanks for listening. And
thanks, man.
We need a review.
He's
of
the one.
host.
I was wondering who it was. I noticed every time we put out an episode, this guy listens to it, and I was like, this person.
We had one listener. Yeah, that's him.
It's him.
You have to make sure you get some feedback from him on host once he watches.
Yeah.
You know, it's actually a better deal for him because he's our listener. But if he puts out a podcast, the 3 of us will check it out probably.
Unfair.
It's automatically 3 times the audience.
Dang it.
Dang.
Well played, sir. Well played.
Cool, man.
All right, man. Well, let's wrap this up. Movieschmovie.com is where you can find all of our podcasts. Facebook.com/movieschmovie if you want to comment. If you checked out Lovecraft Country already, the first episode last week, let us know what you thought. And if you have any ideas about where the show is going, maybe comment. Maybe we'll tell you if you're right or you're wrong for the first 5 episodes.
Yeah.
But yeah, man. How cool was that? Just one more time that we got to watch all.
No, that was
So
great.
Like,
damn cool,
it was great.
man.
Yes.
It was
damn
awesome.
cool.
It was so cool. But yeah, so thanks again HBO for that. But
And you know, when the
Facebook-
season's over, we should probably come back and assess how they handle
Sure.
things. So
Sure,
we'll talk about
of
it
course.
again.
But yeah, if you have any other shows, movies, anything you're finding on streaming platforms, or maybe you're going to a drive-in and you saw a really cool movie you want to tell us about, maybe tell us. And love to talk to you guys. To whoever's listening to this podcast, thank you again. If you're subscribed through the platform of your choice, if you can leave a review, star rating, comments, whatever it takes. If you could just put something on the podcast letting us know that you're listening,
Please.
on that platform, that would be appreciated. Help maybe some new listeners find the podcast. We'd be very thankful if you could do that. But until next week, I'm not sure what we're doing next week, but we'll do something fun. I'm sure it's going to be just as exciting as this episode was, if not more. But yeah, as always, you've made our day. Thanks.
Bye.